Would you please state first and last name for the court?
Okay. My name's Dr. Michael Heninger, and it's spelled Michael, and then Heninger.
Good morning, Dr. Heninger. Where do you work?
I am currently retired. I've worked at the Fulton Co Medical Examiner's office until January of 2023.
Okay, and you mentioned that you're retired and you worked until January of 2023. How long were you overall a medical examiner?
I started in 1995 and worked full time until that point when I retired, and then in the last year I've done a few cases, a few days a month over at DeKalb County. So about 28 or 29 years.
And what were some of your duties and responsibilities as a medical examiner?
Okay, so the duties that we have are involved with death investigation of suspicious or violent deaths. And we have investigators who collect information. They may go to the scene of the death, or they help us gather medical records and other information from the police. Then we review those. We examine the remains of deceased individuals. We often do autopsies on them. And then we review the information that's gathered, and we determine a cause and manner of death. So that's kind of the first part of our job. The second part is to take the information that we have gained and share it with the community that's interested. It can be attorneys, prosecution and defense. It can be public health, it can be family members, insurance companies. I mean, there's a variety of people that are interested in information. So we convey that information. And so that's what I'm doing right now.
And were your duties the same on April 7th of 2020?
Yes, they're pretty similar. I mean, they're, well, identical, really, yes.
And what's your educational background?
Okay, so I started out, I went to college at Utah State University, and I received a Bachelor of Science degree. And it was in biology. And then I went to medical school at the University of Utah, and I received an MD degree. And then I went and I did an internship in internal medicine, and that was at Keesler Air Force Base in Biloxi, Mississippi. And then I practiced primary care medicine for a few years. After I'd completed my service there in the military, I went back to Utah and I did a 4-year residency in pathology. And then I did a 1-year fellowship in forensic pathology. It's a subspecialty pathology. And that was done at the up in Minneapolis at the Hennepin County Medical Examiner's office. And then after I finished my fellowship, I moved to Atlanta and started working for Fulton County.
Okay, and you mentioned that you have a specialty in forensic pathology. Can you explain a little bit what pathology is?
Okay, pathology is a subspecialty of medicine that is focused on the physical appearance of diseases and injuries. It's like you look and see kind of a field that's been around a lot. And it has two branches. One is anatomic, where you're looking at things that are, specimens, biopsies, autopsies, things like that. The other half of it's clinical, which is, laboratory medicine, basically. So we sometimes have some role in that.
And are you board certified?
Yes, I am.
And what does board certification mean?
Board certification means that there's these organizations that are called like the American Board of Pathology or the Surgery, American Board of all the different specialties. Each one of these boards defines what it means to be specialized, and they select institutions that they feel like meet the requirements as far as the caseload and the teaching situations. And so you're required to attend one of those institutions, and you're required to do a certain number of months of rotations, where you're evaluated. And then when you complete that 4-year program, then you have to take a test to be board certified. It's usually a pretty rigorous test and it has a high failure rate. So if you complete all of the time that you know, at the institution and you complete the test, then you're declared board certified. So that's what I had done.
And are you a member of any professional societies?
Yes, I'm a member of what's called the National Association of Medical Examiners. It's a group of mostly forensic pathologists, and it's a fairly small group because there aren't very many of us do this. And then I'm a member of another organization called the American Academy of Forensic Science, and it includes many of the forensic sciences, and there's thousands of people that belong to that.
Okay, and have you ever testified in court before?
Yes.
Do you know how many times or a ballpark?
Well, hundreds of times, probably, I think I'm on 26 or 27 just since I retired,
And you said that's just since you retired?
just in the last year.
Okay. And a ballpark of how many autopsies you've performed?
I didn't keep perfect track of that, but I did about 250 a year or more for 27, 28 years. So that's up, 6,000 something.
And have you ever been qualified as an expert?
Yes.
Have you ever been denied an expert?
No.
And you were qualified as an expert in forensic pathology?
That's the only thing I've been qualified in.
Okay. At this time, I would like to qualify Dr. Heninger as an expert in forensic pathology.
Any objection from the defense? You may proceed.
What is an autopsy?
An autopsy is a medical procedure, and it's performed on the remains of a deceased individual. And the purpose of the autopsy is to try and determine the cause and manner of death, mostly the cause of death.
And what is the purpose of performing an autopsy?
Mainly to try and figure out why the person died or their cause of death, what mechanism, what diseases, what injuries they have that made it so that they were no longer able to continue to live.
And on April 7th, 2020 at 10:30 a.m., did you perform an autopsy on an individual by the name of Andrew Chuong?
Yes, I did.
And can you please tell the jury how the body presented? Was it sealed or
I would need to get my report, which I think you have a copy of right there.
And brings me to my next question. Did you document the findings of the autopsy?
Yes, I did.
And how was that documented?
Two ways it's documented. It's documented with a report, which I dictate while I'm doing the case, and then it's typed up and corrected. And it's also documented with photography.
Okay, and was that done contemporaneously with the autopsy?
Yeah, the process begins, the way I do it is right there. I'm basically, when I'm doing the autopsy, I'm not thinking about the grammar and the structure of the report. I'm thinking about what am I seeing? What do I want to make sure gets in this report? I just dictate it as it goes. And then later it has to be organized, put into a standard form and corrected, try and get the grammar and the spelling correct. So that's a process, but it begins and the information is derived through direct observation while I'm looking at the body in the autopsy room.
Okay. Dr. Heninger, I am showing you what is previously been marked as States Exhibit 135. Do you recognize it?
Yes, I do.
Can you tell me what you recognize it to be?
This is an autopsy report for Andrew Chuong.
And is it a fair and accurate representation of the autopsy report you reviewed for the autopsy of Andrew Chuong?
Yes, it is.
And at this time, I would like to tender States Exhibit 135 in the evidence.
Any objection to 135? 135 is admitted.
Okay, and permission to publish?
You may.
We'll get that published shortly. In the interim, I'll move on to something else. Dr. Heninger, let me go back to asking you that first question I asked you earlier. Did that autopsy, sealed or unsealed?
Okay, so this body came to us in a white disaster bag and it was sealed with our medical examiner's tag and the seal number is 1459572.
I'm sorry, Dr. Heninger, you mentioned there were photos taken during the autopsy as well, correct?
That's correct.
You know who they were taken by?
We have photographers that are basically, that's what they do. They're professional photographers. There's one at this time that's been there for 10 years longer than I have. And she usually did the complicated cases. And the other people that help are also trained. So I don't know for sure who took these photographs. I'm probably like 80 or 90% certain that was the one that's done it for the longest.
Were you there when they?
Yes, I tell her, this is what we need.
Okay, and I think you may have gotten into this a little bit earlier, but what is the purpose of taking those photos?
The photographs are basically a picture's worth 1,000 words, and it's basically to help me remember and to see, also to help me explain these injuries.
Okay, and I'm showing you what's been previously marked as State's Exhibits 136 to 159. Do you recognize them?
Okay.
Judge, can we be led?
Yes, I do.
All right, if we can add Ms. Willingham and someone else from the state as a co-host to the Zoom call.
And you said you do recognize them?
Yes, I do.
What are they?
These are just a few of the pictures that were taken at the autopsy.
And are they a fair and accurate representation of how the body looked when the autopsy was performed?
Yes.
Okay. And Dr. Heninger, what is the purpose of the state would move to tender State's Exhibits 136 to 159?
Objection to 136 through 159. And then without objection.
Thank you. And Dr. Heninger, what is the purpose of assigning a case number?
Okay, well, we do a lot of cases, and some of them resemble each other, and I have a hard time remembering the cases I did last week because there's so many of them. So the case number is essential for us to not mix them up with other cases, which is really easy to do if you don't really keep track of these case numbers.
Okay, and so is it then unique to that case you mentioned, so you don't mix them up?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, and Dr. Heninger, what was the reason you identified for performing the examination?
Okay, the reason for performing examination is basically, an autopsy is generally something that requires the permission of the family in a hospital situation. So you have to go get their permission. In certain cases, we are allowed to do an autopsy regardless of their permission, or even if we even know who they are, to get the permission. And this is regulated. And so the reason for examination, I'm putting forth enough information there is it's kind of summary information that I know at the beginning, but to basically justify that I can do this under the authority of the state and not because the family said I could or couldn't. And so the reason for examination is we were told, there was stabbing and, altercation, that's enough so that we need to look into it.
Okay, and is it common then for you all to receive that request?
What happens, I guess it's not really a request, it's basically what we do. We're called by people, the police, hospitals, when a death occurs, and we do have the power to, what we say, decline it if we think it's not something we're going to be interested in. But basically, they call us, and that's what starts the process.
Okay, and okay, Dr. Heninger, let's walk through the summary of your findings. Can you go through that area and kind of explain to us what your findings were in this autopsy?
Okay, and,
Unfortunately, I can't put it up on the screen yet.
okay, most of the time of my career, they weren't able to do that, but recently.
You're still not a host? All right. Paging Mr. Derberry in the back. We need to add as a co-host. And what is the...
It's my name.
All right. Ms. Willingham is a co-host.
Okay,
All right. Ms.
so,
Willingham, you can either wait a minute or if you feel comfortable going forward, whatever you prefer.
Okay, it looks like we're connecting, so if you give us just a moment, Judge. Want to make sure we're doing all right. Oh, yeah.
okay.
Do you want to close and open it back up full or? Okay, Dr. Heninger, scrolling to the section of your report on page 2.
Okay. Okay, so,
And this is State's Exhibit 135. You've already discussed, I'm sorry, the reason you identified for performing the examination. So let's go down into the summary of findings. Starting there with the first one, can you kind of walk us through those findings?
okay, so the summary of findings is kind of, I try and get it down to one page and have just the really important things on there. Okay, so, and I organize it generally from top to bottom, or just sometimes whatever makes sense at the time. Okay, so I have like 9 categories there. The first 7 are injuries. There's 3 sharp force injuries and some superficial injuries on the right side of his face. There's a stab wound near his right clavicle or collarbone that actually goes into his chest, to where it gets to his lung. There's the most severe of these is the stab wound. It's on the sternum, and it goes into his heart and into one of the large vessels that comes out of the heart. Then there's a group of superficial injuries on his right shoulder that aren't very severe. There's some cuts and abrasions on his hip and his abdomen. These are less severe. And then going over onto his back, there are 6 more stab wounds back there. These hit ribs or just weren't deep enough to get into the body. And then there's some more superficial injuries. One of them is actually the largest of these injuries. It's in the back of his leg, but it didn't do any, didn't damage any major blood vessels or. Okay. And then there's a few other little problems that he had. These are natural diseases. He's 55 years old. He's got a little bit of heart disease. Heart's enlarged, dilated, and kind of thick. He's got some congestion, and on the microscope, a little bit of early kind of emphysema starting to come in. Just common people once they get older. And he's got a kind of an interesting little thing. We call these fascinomas. They're just things you find that are kind of fascinating but not very relevant. He has a mucus cyst in the back of his throat down the epiglottis. Is a flap of the throat that closes the esophagus where food goes while you're breathing, and then it opens so you can swallow. And it's right there. There's it's a mucus cyst, which is benign and doesn't cause death, and it's not really a problem. I don't know if he knew about it or not. They can be removed pretty easily. The last thing we do is that we look at his blood for other substances like illegal drugs, things like that, or alcohol. and that's called toxicology, and there was none of those that were found.
Okay, and Dr. Heninger, I know we went through the summary a bit. Would the photos that were taken be able to help you better explain some of where these injuries were that you've pointed out?
Yes.
And okay, taking a look at, I was going to say I'm gonna have to stop sharing. Okay. I'm gonna stop sharing just for a moment, Dr. Heninger, so I can maximize the screen, and then I'll open it back up.
Okay.
Okay, and starting with State's Exhibit 136. Oh, I'm sorry. That photo that you were just looking at, Dr. Heninger, you talked about a seal earlier.
Yes.
Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, this is the first picture that we take. And there is this tag here. It's prepared by investigator. This case is Brian Rentz. And he's kind of a retired detective and one of our lead investigators. And it has the case number on there. He's handwritten, the name, the information that we have. And this 1459572, which is that seal number. And that seal goes around the zipper, the bag. The body bag is white and it has a black zipper, and you can see the zipper. And that's somebody's thumb, probably his. And basically, he puts this on when he puts the body in this bag and seals it. And then it's transported to our office and kept in the cooler until we do the autopsy.
Okay. And taking a look at this next photo, Dr. Heninger, what are we looking at in State's Exhibit 137?
Okay, this used to be the first picture we took before we started doing these seals, which you could see over on the table. The next thing we do is we unzip the bag and we take a picture, and we put this tag, it's got the number on it. And that is also sorry.
You can keep discussing that picture.
Okay. Okay, what that picture shows is there's these clothed. It shows that he doesn't have medical intervention. And then it kind of gives you kind of like a ballpark, his size, his age, things like that.
Okay, and moving on to State's Exhibit 138, what are we looking at here?
Okay, this is the back of the shirt that he was wearing. And those little arrows that are kind of white and yellow, they are holes in the shirt. Okay, now some people have holes in their clothes for any variety of reasons. But these are not perfect, but they're kind of in the same pattern of the stab wounds. So it's often important to look at this outer surface of whatever injury there is. There might be things on the shirt that aren't on the body that relate to the injuries. I don't see anything interesting on these other than that they're just holes in his shirt.
Okay, and Dr. Heninger, you mentioned in the summaries that you discussed earlier, there was a portion that you mentioned that there was a group of six. Yes, that there were a group of 6 stab wounds on the right and left side of the back.
Mhm.
Is that what's okay?
Yeah, that's what that is, and I numbered it 6, just coincidentally, but yeah.
Okay. And in this next photo, what are we looking at here?
Okay, this is kind of an ID photo that we take. It doesn't, sometimes we put the number in it, and it's just a picture of his face. It does show some of the injuries on his face. They are on the right side one of them's up by his right eye here. And some of them are down around his side of his mouth, on the right side of his mouth. These are cuts and they're from injuries from a sharp object.
And Dr. Hinder, I noticed you were up wanting to point. I have a
Oh.
little. Just,
I used to-
there's a little
Yes,
laser pin on the front, so you just push that button right there.
that's nice. Okay.
Okay, and moving on to this next photo, I know you just discussed some of the injuries in the face. Is that what you were pointing to, just closer up?
Yeah, this I think's a better picture because it's actually focused in on and it's got the face in the right plane where you can really see these injuries. This
Like
thing
it's
just
work- oh,
worked,
there.
didn't it? Does it not work on the screen?
My apologies, it looks like it may not work on the screen.
That's amazing.
Okay. So my apologies, you may still have to get up, Dr. Henninger. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Okay, taking a look at this next photo.
Okay.
Is this just a different angle?
Yeah. The one before showed these kind of, in the center and focused on this and these. Now these are sharp. They're not from scratches. They're cuts. And then there's, this is an abrasion. It's kind of related to a scrape. Okay, so there.
All right, I'm gonna zoom out just a bit, so maybe that'll help actually show the whole picture. That might make it just a little bit easier for you. My apologies. Okay, when it pops up, is that a little bit easier for you having the whole picture up at one time?
Yeah, that helps.
Okay,
It's still-
so now taking a look at State's Exhibit 142, what are we looking at here?
Okay, so this kind of helps localize so you know where injuries are. Sometimes if you take a close-up picture of an injury, you don't know where it is. So the next injury on our list was this stab wound that's over the right clavicle or the collarbone here. And you can see where it is kind of related to the other injuries. And then there's a group of superficial injuries over on his right shoulder.
Moving to State's Exhibit 143.
Okay, so this is the stab wound on the collarbone there. And we're interested in looking at stab wounds and seeing what information we can derive from them. A simple stab wound might just be like a cut or just, if a person uses a single-edged knife where it has one edge is sharp and the other is a rib that's strong, you'll get an injury where the sharp part of the knife will be really pointed, and where the dull part of the knife goes in, it will be more squared off a little bit. Or if you hit with hilts, the knives have hilts or on the handles. If the stab wound is with enough force, it may cause abrasions. Also, people tend to not just sit still while they're being stabbed; they often move around. So you'll get some features of that. So when I look at this stab wound, this right here and this down here are interesting. The thing they really want me to do is to tell you exactly which knife did this, which I can't do, but what kind of an idea of what it looked like. And most knives are enough alike that they make similar wounds. So there's a lot of overlap. but that's nonetheless, the lower part of this is kind of squared off and it's an abrasion. Okay. And I don't know, I don't know for sure on these, but that might suggest the hilt. And if the knife is coming in at a pretty steep angle, the lower part of the hilt will hit the body first. Okay. The other side, it's kind of hard to say. That's a cut. It looks like a cut. It could be a abrasion from tearing, but that could be the sharp blade. So I would suggest the blade is up, but it could just be from tearing the skin. So I'm not sure, but that's the purpose of these pictures. And that one's kind of better than average. We try and do this, but it's not as accurate as that we really would like.
Taking a look at State's Exhibit 144. What are we looking at here?
Okay, this is the stab wound on the chest, the sternum that went into his heart. And you can see the other ones kind of see where it's kind of localized.
And you mentioned on his sternum, it went into his heart. Would that be consistent with a blade that's more than 3 inches?
Okay, that's the other thing that we want to know from these wounds is it seems like you could just sort of go, well, let's see, this wound is 3 inches, therefore the knife's 3 inches. Well, the problem with that is, first of all, the knife may not go all the way in. You could have a knife that's a foot long. If it only goes in 6 inches, you wouldn't know it was a foot long. You can also cave in organs. The chest cavity, the whole point of CPR is to create enough distance that you're compressing the heart, for CPR. So you can cave in a chest, several inches, abdomen even more. So there's that problem. So you can have a 3-inch knife, make a 6-inch deep wound. So that's kind of hard. But if you think about how big he is, the heart sits right here. And there's probably less than an inch of skin and muscle and fat on him. And the sternum that goes through this bone is about as thick as this thing. It's bone, and then the heart sits right there. So that's really close to it's right above the heart.
And you mentioned that a 3-inch blade could make a wound deeper.
Yes.
Than 3 inches. Can you tell whether, based on how deep you just explained that the knife or that the wound itself was, would you be able to say whether the knife is over 3 inches?
No, not definitively. It could be smaller. It could be larger than 3 inches.
And taking a look at this next photo, is this the same wound? It's
Yes.
just closer?
Yes,
Or is it a
and
different one?
this is the same wound. This is unusual because it has an abrasion around it. Here. And that's from scraping. And that is because it had to be a lot of force to do that. And that force, this is kind of interesting, and you'll see how interesting on another ones we'll get to, but this goes not around the sternum, it goes through it. And the sternum the bone is stronger than wood, especially when it's a living bone, it's somewhat flexible. And so this blade went through his bone, the sternum. Like this right here is, well, it's thinner, but it's metal, so it's probably a little bit stronger. But if you thought of something like this, that was made out of solid plastic that was 1/4 of an inch thick, and some plastic that's the same strength as bone, and that took a lot of force to do that. And so, and then once it gets through that bone, it can go however far it goes.
And taking a look at State's Exhibit 146, what are we looking at here?
Okay, this is, there's these three injuries on the right shoulder, and they are, make sure that I get these things. They're basically a combination of abrasions, superficial abrasions, and a cut. And so there's been the blade of the knife scraped right here. And I don't know, these are more abrasions, and I don't know exactly how those happen.
And what are we looking at here in State's Exhibit 147?
So now we've gone down onto his right side of his body on just below his waistline at top of his hip. And there's a cut there. It's fairly long, doesn't go very deep.
And in State's Exhibit 148, what are we looking at here?
This is a long, very thin, very superficial injury that would require a sharp object to make it, like a cut.
And looking at State's Exhibit 149, I'll rotate that for you. What are we looking at here?
Okay, these are 6 stab wounds on his back. Excuse me. And you can see how they are sort of like the shirt, but also sort of not. Okay, and that's because clothing can move around. I can't tell the order these occurred. They all look pretty typical stab wounds. All of them are going from back to front, but they have different directions after that. Some of them are going upward or downward or right or left. And interestingly, they don't get through the bones there. I mean, this one's right on the spinal column, and that one. And these others are either over bones or ribs. So they actually don't causes. They do contribute to because they bleed, and his ultimate cause of his death is all the bleeding, but they don't contribute as much as being stabbed in the heart. And we can kind of look at these and try and figure out if we think what kind of a knife it is. And some of them have little tails on them where they're cuts at the end. These are probably the sharp edge. Like this one's pretty good that's pretty sharp there, and that's kind of squared off. So that would suggest the edge of the blade is over here, the knife is there. And then if the knife is that wide, that would make it, but if the knife is narrower, you can just pull it across. So that, again, that's another factor that we want to be able to look at. It doesn't work very good, but you can make a long cut with a short knife. And we can kind of go through and look at each of them, and they're not perfectly clear on all of that. And I don't know the order that they occurred.
And taking a look at State's Exhibit 150.
So this is the one up on the shoulder. It's furthest left. It's kind of got a sharp corner here, and there's a little abrasion there. So the blade's probably downward on that.
And 151.
This one looks like there's a cut there. That's square, so the blade's probably down. If I had this one by itself, the only wound on his body, I'd probably say, I don't know. But since they're right next to each other, there's kind of like guilt from association. So if I had to guess, I would say that's the same as this, but it might be the opposite.
And State's Exhibit 152.
I think this is sharp, and that's squared, so I think the blade is downward on that one. And this one we talked about, I think it's a little bit closer for it.
Okay, and what are we looking at here in State's Exhibit 154?
Okay, this is the back of his leg. It's his left leg, he's laying flat. You see the fingerprint stuff on his hands. We fingerprinted him, didn't get that washed off before we took this picture. And this is the biggest injury. And you can pretty much see all of it. It doesn't go very deep, and it just opens up the skin. The fat is kind of yellow. And then they're getting down into the muscles, the linings of the muscles are called fascia, that are on top of the muscle. And that's a big cut. And it's kind of hard to tell which way that is, the angles on it.
And that's a closer up version of that. Are you able to tell from that picture?
That looks sharp and that's kind of squared off. So maybe that way. But it's, you know.
And moving to State's Exhibit 156.
Hey, this is a very minor injury. It's on his knee. It's kind of interesting, at least to me. I'm trying to see if I can get more information out of this than it's just an abrasion on his knee. It is square, or kind of got two corners on it, square. It's kind of has abrupt and pretty deep and then superficial. And so I'm trying to imagine what kind of an instrument would do that. And if I walked through the hardware store, I could probably pick out a bunch of instruments. If I walk through the house, I don't know, handles or stuff. But that's getting to be what we call patterned injuries. And a really good pattern injury is when you can take the injury and match it to something and convince people it has to be that injury had to be caused by that object. And I'm not there on that, but it's more like a pattern than just, usual abrasions. And I don't have a good answer why that injury is. I mean, it's an abrasion. It's not very severe, but I don't know what caused it.
Okay, and looking at 157, is that just a closer up version of that?
Yes, you can see how it's got pretty deep up on top, and then it's kind of fades down. Something that's about this size right here, at least partially.
And looking at State's Exhibit 158.
Hey, this is another kind of ragged cut, and it's on his ankle, and that's his left ankle. His toes are down here, and the rest of his legs up there. This is our tag, and we also put these on just so we don't mix him up with other people.
And State's Exhibit 159.
This is another minor injury on his foot. This is on his right foot, right here in this area, and it's very superficial.
Okay, and taking a look at page 4 of your report. Well, first, I'm sorry, before we get into page 4 of your report, can you tell us how many stab wounds were present in total?
Depends on how you count them. I lettered them up to 24 letters of the alphabet, but I grouped some of them. So, and then some of them are abrasions. And so there's at least 24, and probably, I don't think there's more than 30. I don't think I grouped them that much.
Okay, and of the injuries that we discussed, which ones would you say were contributors to his death?
Okay, so I guess it depends. I mean, it's not like a black and white or binary thing, where this one's didn't contribute. This one definitely, I mean, you could argue every drop of blood counts or whatever. Some of these are so minor that they're, very little contribution. And some of them have made some contribution. The one in his chest was the biggest contributor to his death. It went into his heart, caused a lot of bleeding there. The one up on his collarbone also went into his chest. It got his lung. The lung bleeds a lot. Also, once you puncture a lung, you can't your breathing doesn't work, so he's only breathing with one lung. You have to have your lungs work on negative pressure so that when you take a breath, when you inhale, what you're doing is you're increasing the volume of your chest, which decreases the pressure and it sucks the air in. Well, if you puncture that, it won't work. And so he doesn't have a lung. One of his lungs is disabled from that stab wound, so he's not breathing. The problem with bleeding is that blood carries, well, the first problem with bleeding is that it carries oxygen. So you run out of oxygen. So now you've got a lung, so he's only getting half as much oxygen being loaded into his blood, and you've got it all being pumped somewhere where it's not doing any good. So they're both of those are contributory, pretty serious. The others are the ones on the face might bleed pretty bad. The one on the back of his leg, that's big enough, it'd probably bleed a lot. So it's kind of a continuum. I guess it's kind of like a classroom of rowdy kids, and you can pick out the two that are the worst, but the others are contributing to different degrees.
Okay, and now moving to page 4 of your report, let's take a look at sections or at letters under the injuries of the anterior. Let's look at letter F and H. We can start with F. And can you kind of explain that injury to us?
Okay, F is my more detailed description of that injury on his collarbone, right clavicle, right here. I write where it's at. And then I kind of describe it. And then I talk about, it gets into the chest cavity, it goes through the first space, the first and second rib space there, it doesn't hit the rib. And then it creates a teeny puncture on the right upper lobe. It's like these, this is 2 and 3 millimeters. So it's not very severe, but it does open up the chest cavity, and that will bleed. And then I put directions on it. So it's from his front, his back, and downward, like this.
Okay, and taking a look at H, I think this was one you explained before as well, but does this section help you explain it a little more in depth?
Yes, this is the one that's on his front of his chest, precordial. It's kind of in front of the heart. And it's, got how far away it is. It's oriented kind of diagonally on its size. Just the one I thought was angulated versus squared. And then I think I was not supposed to write on this report. This is me when we were talking about this earlier. And so it goes through the sternum and right where the fourth ribs attach. And it's this kind of interesting how the wound may be kind of diagonal a little bit here to 8 o'clock. But then when it goes through the sternum, it's horizontal. Okay, so there's movement going on. And then I measured the thickness of the sternum. That's about a centimeter. My fingernail just happens to be a centimeter wide. It's very useful sometimes. And this is like 6/10 of that, or like a little bit more than half that. So it's about that thick, the sternum there. And then this tells what it damaged inside of his chest. Okay, so there's this sac around the heart that protects it. It went through that, and then the space inside of that sac is called the pericardial sac and the pericardial cavity. And there's blood there. There's a large vessel that comes out of the aorta, or comes out of the heart, called the aorta. It hits that ascending aorta, and it's only 3 centimeters, which is 1.5 inches above the valve with the heart. So it's right out of the heart by 1.5 inches. Okay, and by that point, it's vertically oriented instead of horizontal. The heart, if you've ever seen I don't know if you've looked at YouTube, they have pictures of open heart surgery while the heart's beating, and it is doing like this. It moves a lot. It's really amazing. That's why they have to stop it to do surgery on it. Anyway, so it can move. Injuries through the heart are often not the same direction as the ones around them. So that's pretty much expected. And then it cuts open the left atrium. There's the four chambers of the heart. That's the one on the left that's higher, the smaller one. And then the chest cavities are filled with blood. The chest cavities are not separate from each other. And so if you put like a gallon of blood on the right side, and then you take the body and roll it over, like what they have to do to move it, the blood can go both sides. So even though you might expect not very much blood on the left side, there was a lot of blood on both sides.
And going back to page 2 of your report, can you explain to us what does the cause of death mean?
Okay, the cause of death is the basically it's the whatever change or injury in the body that makes it no longer able to function. And I like to think of cause of death as like chapter headings in textbooks. So in a general medicine textbook, you might have a chapter on heart attack or pneumonia or lung cancer. Those are causes of death. Forensics books, they might be like gunshot wound or stab wound, drug overdose, drowning, electrical shock, things like this. Those are the causes of death.
And what is the manner of death mean?
Okay, and the manner is homicide. And manner, we use that word in our own little special way. Okay, because it's kind of got a general, kind of vague general. And what we're doing, this is for public health reasons. So we look at each death and we look at the autopsy findings and we also look at the circumstances that we know about. And we try and take that death and put it in one of 4 categories. The categories are natural deaths, which are the majority of them. And those are due to problems inside of the body, medical problems. All the subspecialties of medicine exist to deal with those. And then there are accidental deaths. These are injuries that are due to something outside of the body, out in the environment, that's kind of unforeseen or just kind of happened. And then there are suicides, which are inflicted injuries intentionally by a person on themselves to cause their death. And then there's homicides, which are injuries that are intentionally inflicted on another person. And then we have a 5th category for the undetermined, because there's some situations are kind of boundaries between these, or mixes of these. Life is never simple enough. You can put it in 4 boxes. So we have undetermined for those cases. So in this case, this is not a natural death. It's not an accident, and it doesn't appear to be self-inflicted. So it's a homicide.
Okay, and I think you answered, well, you just answered why you ruled it a homicide. Nothing further.
Mr. Chuong, any cross-examination?
So you said that there was stabs near the clavicle that goes into the chest cavity, correct?
That's correct.
And the stab near the sternum that goes into the aorta and heart, correct?
Yes.
And then the one that goes through the sternum's hard and thick, correct? You said it's like wood?
It's a bone. It's like a bone, and it's about this wide, and it's about, half as thick as my thumb. So it's, your skull in some places is thicker than that. Right here it's thinner, but kind of the thickness of the skull right here is similar to it. So it's bone. So bone is like, you can think of bone and wood are 2 biological things, but the difference is that bone has minerals in it that wood doesn't. And it also has elasticities and so it can flex a little bit more. Wood does too, to some degree. But so it's kind of an approximate model, but it's not perfect. I think it would be harder to stab through wood, through bone than wood, but at least has hard.
So there were some deep stabs, and you said yourself it takes a lot of force and strength to make those stabs, correct?
The one through the bone wood, the ones on the back, the strongest thing it has to go through is the dermis, and this is like leather, And so in the skin leather's kind of, you took a typical shoe, the leather on the shoe, like even this plastic it's kind of thick like that. So you have to get through that. The skin above it doesn't have very much resistance. And below that, there's fat, which has very little resistance. And then muscle, which is like, you're pretty familiar with muscle because it's basically like raw meat. And then internal organs tend to be softer. The heart's as strong as it's a muscle. So those are the forces that are needed to do the stab wounds.
So a person who is strong would have to make those wounds, correct?
Well, yes. I mean, how strong? Then we get into some really difficult calculations and biomechanics that has so many variables that it's hard to say. But as far as if you think of strong as in a relative strength, I mean, I don't know how many members of the jury are strong enough to do this, but probably more than one. Probably several of them are strong enough. And then it depends on how motivated they are.
And there's a lot of stabs and cuts around my father's body, all from, different directions, you said, correct?
Yes.
And there were all different types of cut and stabs, correct?
Well, there's a bunch, yeah.
Some deep, some shallow, and then there's some on top of his body, and then there's some on his back, you said about 6?
There were 6 back there, yeah.
And then some on his front, and then some on the bottom of his body, the one on his thigh.
Yes.
Pretty bad, you said?
Yeah, well, it's big.
So ultimately, the reason he died was bleeding.
That's correct.
So if someone was near him and could have helped him, he could have lived, would you say?
Oh, that's a good question. Okay, so the way hypothetical, same question is, if he was stabbed on the front porch of Grady Hospital with the best surgical team in the country ready to go, could they fix this? This has got 2 pretty severe injuries that would have to be fixed at the same time. It would be pretty hard. If you talk to the trauma surgeons or optimists, they might say, oh yeah, maybe we can fix that. But I've seen a lot of injuries like this that didn't get fixed, that were in the emergency room. I mean, we're really close. So it's possible. And the trauma surgeons might say, well, yeah, maybe, but, it would be heroic. It'd have to be fast because he's going to bleed to death in a few minutes.
Do you think it was, since you said that the wounds in the back weren't as deep, correct?
Well, they didn't get into his chest cavity. They didn't go into his lungs or his heart. They just stayed in his muscles.
Is there a lot of obstruction in the back?
Well, some of them are right over the spinal column. So there's those. Some of them are ribs. So about maybe a third of the area back there's got ribs. And then there's the scapula, which is a big wing-shaped bone. It's about this big. It's triangular. And it's thinner. People can often get through it easier. But it's the top of it's got big, thick ridges on it. So it's kind of like a rib up there. So just by coincidence, these 6 stab wounds didn't hit a place where they would go through the bones.
Do you think it'd be possible that there could have been 2 attackers since some of the wounds are shallow and some are deep?
Well, I wouldn't, the second half of that I wouldn't agree, but I can't tell how many attackers. I mean, there could be, if I count up to, if I say there's like 25 wounds, there could be 25 people doing that. It'd be seem kind of ridiculous, but there could be 1 or 2 or the more, probably the less likely, but it's possible more people could. And they could maybe one would do one thing and one do the other, but they could both be doing similar things.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, sir. No more further questions.
And redirect Ms. Willingham.
Yes. I'm gonna pull back up your report. Just give me one moment to share my screen again. You just testified, Dr. Heninger, that a lot of the bleeding contributed to the death. Per your report, what is the listed cause of death in this case?
My hearing was
I'm sorry, per your report, what's the listed cause of death in this case?
listed is the word. Okay, the listed cause is stab wounds of the chest, which would include the sternum and the clavicle. And then this gets into different people do different things. You can put this all together. You could say stab wounds of the torso and extremities, or you can list these other ones as significant. And maybe some doctors would say, oh, I just ignore those, you know. So that's other significant conditions based on my opinion. The listed cause of death is stab wounds of the chest.
Okay, and I know you testified that that the bleeding, would, and I don't want to, I believe you actually, I believe the question was, the cause of death was the bleeding. So that's what I want to clarify. You've acknowledged in your report that it was the stab wounds of the chest and that other significant conditions were stab wounds of the torso and extremities. And then earlier you also testified that all of those things caused a lot of bleeding. So is that how you're classifying it?
Yes, there's you can kind of line them up by severity. And the one through the heart is at the front of the line. The one that punctures the lung is there right next to them. And then these other ones are kind of based on how much they bleed the face, the big ones, then the little ones. And so they're all contributing a little bit. But the ones at the front of the line are doing most of the contributing to his death.
Thank you.
Any recross on those points only, Mr. Chuong? Ms. Willingham, can this witness be excused?
Yes.
Thank you, doctor.
Yes.
State may call its next witness.
Judge, with respect to the state's next witness, state does not have the next witness to call, but there is an issue that I would like to take up for your honor out of the presence of the jury with respect to the state's finishing their case.
All right. So members of the jury, I think we need to take 10 to 15 minutes, and I hope to be back with you shortly.
All rise for the jurors.
All right, Mr. Holmes, does the state have something additional to add from
Yes,
this
Judge.
morning, or okay, how about it?
Yeah, there was, I guess, an analysis given what was anticipated as the state's next two witnesses, Ms. Jenny Phang and Mr. Eric Chuong, and a request based off of our efforts to locate those witnesses for a continuance. I wanted to supplement the record and supplement the state's request within the alternative, the court to consider a mistrial. My review of case law in this instance for a state requested mistrial does allow, obviously, the court has broad discretion to grant a mistrial under those grounds. I am pointing to specifically Spearman v. State, which is 278 Georgia 327. That is a case in which the defendant, in his first trial, a mistrial was granted for the state when they were unable to produce a witness that was under subpoena due to the witness actually being involved in a car accident and being unavailable because of physical hospitalization. In this instance, although there is not a specific kind of physical condition that prevents these witnesses from appearing, there is the unknown or unforeseeable unavailability, if you will, of these witnesses. Both witnesses were under subpoena, Judge, and the state anticipated calling both witnesses all the way up until through the start of trial. And so from the state's perspective, and the issue of whether or not the court abuses discretion in granting a mistrial at the request of the state, goes through sort of a manifest necessity analysis.
All right. And Mr. Holmes, I understand, you probably have some additional legal arguments on that front. My thought is that it's a bit premature yet to go through that. You can flag it and we'll get into that. Let me start out from the outset. And Mr. Chuong, the state is essentially requesting, if not now, at some point, perhaps tomorrow or Friday, that if they're not able to obtain these two subpoenaed witnesses in court, that it should be, they're moving for a mistrial, which means that essentially what we did this week would be canceled, and that we would come back for another trial and start fresh with a new jury from the beginning at another time. And so do you have any position on that at the front end?
I'll need to do some research on that, and when that happens, I'll be able to show my position on that issue.
So at this time, you're not objecting to it, you're just deferring? All right, that's not necessarily something that we can postpone indefinitely, but noted. I'll note, I think the standard that has to be met is a manifest necessity. And, just a few things that give me a bit of a pause, which was, despite the witnesses, it anticipated them being waffly. They were subpoenaed and then told they didn't have to come till Tuesday. So we lost a day there. And then when we knew they didn't show up Tuesday morning, I didn't get a ping warrant until the very end of the day. And so we kind of lost another day there. So, I'm trying to work through that. And I'm also trying to work through the manifest necessity of their testimony and whether all the evidence that's already come in really makes their testimony material at this point. I don't know yet. And I haven't made any decision on that yet. And I also think that we wouldn't be looking at a mistrial yet. We'd be looking at a postponement. And whether that's a postponement for 12 hours a day or a week, that's still the bridge to cross before we get to start talking about a mistrial.
And Judge, just to clarify my point, I didn't mean to interrupt you. That is the state's position as well.
I understand.
I wanted to make sure that was provided to the court on the record before the state announced that we were resting our case.
Understood, Mr. Holmes. You preserved the argument. We'll put it that way. Mr. Chuong, anything you want to add? Okay, understood. Mr. Holmes, what else? Anything else?
One other thing, Judge, with respect to the cell phone and the request for that tracking through T-Mobile, it has been brought to my attention through our investigators that the provider has changed to AT&T. So we have prepared a new request for your signature based on that change in subscriber, and then we'll go through the normal steps.
And that's already done and drafted?
Yes.
All right. And can you add we'll add some kind of exigent request to it, or I'll handwrite one. All right. So other than that, though, the state anticipates with those objections reserved, resting when the jury comes back?
That is correct.
Okay. All right. So Mr. Chuong, at that point, yes, sir.
How long are you giving the state to?
Don't know yet. I'm going to see what happens today and if we hear back from AT&T. So, but what we would be doing is they'd be resting, and then the jury would come back in and it'd be your turn to present evidence if you have any that you want to present. And so if you have any witnesses subpoenaed, or if you personally want to testify, this would be your opportunity. And so I have a few questions I'd like to ask you about that. So with the understanding that the jury would probably be coming back in here and it'd be your turn, and I just would be asking if the defense has any evidence to present. I always have to ask this of every single defendant in every criminal case. So do you understand you have a right to testify? And if you want to testify, no one can prevent you from doing so. Do you understand that, Mr. Chuong? Do you also understand no one can make or compel you to testify? That is, if you have a right not to testify if you don't want to. And do you understand that you personally are the one, not your shadow counsel or anyone else, who decides whether you testify? Do you understand if you choose to testify, you'll be cross-examined by the state? And do you need any additional time to think about whether you or want to testify? I'm sorry? All right. And how much time?
I would need to know if the state's additional witnesses are here to testify before I make.
Well, I'm not going to approve that much time. At this point, the state may never have the opportunity to present those witnesses, and we may move forward without them. And so if they are able to get their witnesses here, it's going to be as rebuttal evidence. And so at this point, based on the evidence as it stands now, it would be your turn to make that decision.
Get like 10 minutes to.
That's fine. So in 10 minutes, I'll come back. And then the only question I'll have for you is, do you personally want to testify or not? And regardless of that question, do you anticipate having any other witnesses or any other evidence that you plan to introduce? All right. So we'll be back at 11:10. Be in recess. All right, let's go back on the record. It's been about 15 minutes, Mr. Chuong. And as I indicated, the question that I have to put to you is whether you personally want to testify or not when it's your turn and it's your opportunity to present evidence. You would like to testify. All right. Okay. And so in terms of the format of how that would work, I believe that this would be best, since Mr. Shaw is just shadow counsel, that this would take a narrative form, that Mr. Chuong would take the witness stand and he could start explaining his testimony and what he thinks is relevant. And the state could then be making objections as the narrative proceeds. And Mr. Chuong, whenever there's an objection made, it's very important that you stop talking immediately. We work through the objection, and then I'll rule, and then you can either continue or modify what you were saying. I don't think so, because I think that crosses the line into then showing that he is representing you and making strategical choices about what to ask you and what not to ask you. Is there anything that you think you wouldn't be able to cover if Mr. Shaw is asking the questions versus you just providing a narrative? Okay.
That changes my decision. I assume he would be able to pass.
You can have another minute or two if you need to talk to him, but because of the posture we're in, I think it's a free-flowing narrative. And when an attorney asks you questions, that then brings them into the calculation that I don't think we're supposed to have here in a pro se situation. All right. No kidding.
Judge,
Yes, sir.
would I be testifying today or tomorrow?
As I mentioned, it would be pretty much, we'd start now. The jury would come in, state would rest, and then I'd be looking at you to see if you have any evidence to present.
Airport of Baltimore, please. I thought, or I assumed you would be passing. I'm ready.
Yeah, Mr. Chuong, again, if you need a little extra time, I'm willing to give that to you. But again, the ability to stay on track and the anticipation of delays is something I've always got to keep in mind. And I guess to me, I'm not really seeing the major functional difference between you being able to provide your account versus having questions asked of you. I mean, we could always, if we need to, before you give up or finish your account, I'd allow you the chance to confer with Mr. Shaw to see if there's anything else you think you need to cover. But again, I'm thinking that Q&A format is just not something that's appropriate when you're in a purely pro se posture. Okay? So, how much time do you think you need to gather your thoughts here? That's fine. We will tell them that we'll break now. We'll go ahead and bring them in, have the state rest. Then we'll break and we'll have them come back early. We'll have them come back at like 12:30. And we'll proceed with your testimony if you have any. And as I understand it now, the parties are also broaching a resolution potentially.
Yes, Judge, and considering the court is gonna bring the jury in for us to rest, and then they're gonna go on lunch break, I would like to take this moment to acknowledge that negotiation will expire before if the defendant chooses to take the stand, it would expire before that. So on the lunch break,
All right.
we'll be asking that all of that be taken into consideration.
Okay. Well, we'll do this then. I'll make the lunch break a little longer. We'll have it at say 1:00, and you can tell me. I imagine very early on there may be an indication of whether things have broken down or not. And I anticipate maybe the parties will be sticking around in the courtroom, so you can just give me those updates as they come. And if you come to a resolution 30 minutes from now, let's just go ahead and come back and talk through that. But I'll go ahead and bring in the jury and tell them to come back at 1:00. All right? We could bring in the jury. All right. Welcome back, members of the jury. State may call its next witness.
Your Honor, the state would rest subject to rebuttal.
All right. So members of the jury, at this time, the state has indicated that subject to any rebuttal evidence that they've presented their case in chief. And so what that means is we would then turn over to see if the defense would like to introduce any evidence. The defense has no burden whatsoever, but they have the opportunity to present evidence if they want to. Before that can happen, we still have a number of things that we have to do outside of your presence. So we're going to have to take another break because it's close enough to lunch. I figured we would just merge those two together and have a longer lunch break. And so we are still working. We are still on track. And I'll ask you all to be back ready to go at 1:00 this afternoon. Okay? Any questions before we break from anyone? Thank you so much. And where we had left was the question of Mr. Chuong. He had said he was personally willing to desiring to testify, and the state had rested. So the plan would be to bring the jury back in and then turn it over to Mr. Chuong for any evidence he has to present. Is there any reason, beginning with the state, that we should not proceed?
Judge, I don't know where they stood. Mr. Chuong just stepped over. I don't know, so.
No reason from the state. All right, Mr. Chuong.
Yes, I agree to the offer of accommodation.
All right, we need to outline the terms and make sure we're all clear on that. And if that's the way you want to go, it makes no difference to me. But we need to make sure we understand everything. We can go through that. We can enter the plea, and then we'll defer sentencing and excuse the jury, and we can come back and handle that. All right, so first, let's make it clear what it is you believe that you're agreeing to, okay? So let me start, Ms. Willingham, what you have to add.
They made an offer for the defendant to enter a plea to the remaining charges. I'm sorry. The state would move to null pros contingent upon the defendant entering a plea, counts 1 and 2 of the indictment. The defendant has already entered a plea as in count 4 and 6. He would then be entering a plea to the remainder, which would be count 3, 5, 7, 8, 9, and 10.
Oh.
The state would be as the defendant has stated, it would be non-negotiated, and the state would be asking for the maximum sentence on those charges, which by our calculation would be 81 years. And that includes the mergers of the ag batteries or the ag assault into the ag batteries for counts 4 and 6, count 7 and 8, and that is it.
All right. Mr. Chuong, is that your understanding? Okay. Is that your understanding of the state's offer, Mr. Chuong? And so, Ms. Willingham, the state would be, I guess by null processing, there's not really a reduction, but the state is willing to also present this offer as in a non-negotiated posture.
Yes.
All right. And this would be a guilty plea, Mr. Chuong, with to counts 3, 5, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Is that your understanding? Just everything that, other than the first two, and everything that you hadn't already pled guilty to. All right. Is there anything else that you want to add before moving forward then? And we would go through all the rights, and we'd go over this again during the colloquy as well, just to make sure. But if there's anything else you want to discuss before, I just want to make sure if there are any other lingering concerns that you have.
Am I able to plea under first offenders?
First offender is something that you can request. It's not something that you're guaranteed. So that would be part of the non-negotiated aspect of it, first offender. And then I think we just need to address this because I can see it coming up, and we shouldn't waste any more time on it if it's going to be a sticking point. But it also sounds like your shadow counsel is explaining to you something called an Alford plea, where you're not admitting guilt per se, but you're just accepting the consequences because you think the evidence is strong. And that causes me some pause, especially on a case like this where we're mid-trial. I've heard a lot of the evidence and based on the nature of the charges. But I'd be willing to hear first of all, is that what you would be seeking to enter your plea? Saying that you did not commit the crimes, but that you're wanting to be punished for them and accept the punishment? Okay, Ms. Willingham, what is the state's position on an Alford plea? All right, and that objection would be the null process of counts 1 and 2 would be conditioned on that. All right, so just to make it clear, Mr. Chuong, if you're wanting to go forward with this, the only way it's going to be possible is if you're actually admitting guilt to the charges you're pleading guilty to. There is sometimes an option in other cases, a way around that, but apparently not here. All right, does that make sense? Okay. All right, well then you can have a seat and make sure that you're talking clearly into the microphone. And Ms. Willingham, I'd ask that you go through the colloquy. And I think for the purposes of the factual basis, you can just rely on the record that's been presented. And I think the defense would likely be stipulating to this factual basis.
Sorry, just a second. Can you hear me? Yeah, but do you pull up my feet? Would you like me to come up as I usually do? If I'm wait, if not, the other me. I'm here finished.
All right, Ms. Willingham, if you could swear in Mr. Chuong and proceed.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you shall give in the matter currently before this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Can I get 5 minutes to discuss?
At this point, Mr. Chuong, I mean, I've given you a lot of time to talk these things over. We've had a long lunch break. It's an important decision, but it's, first of all, when you said your counsel, you don't have counsel. That's just you. And so I'm not really clear what could still be left to discuss at this point.
It's just. The sentencing will make your. Yes, I would.
Okay, so again, Ms. Willingham has a lot of things she needs to go over with you, and you got to listen to him very, very carefully. And if you have any questions about him, you can let me know. Ms. Willingham.
Okay. Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you shall give in the matter currently before this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
You can put your hand down. Please state your name, your age, and your date of birth.
Austin Chuong, 23, April 2000.
Are you now under the influence of any medicine, drugs, or alcohol?
No.
How far did you go in school?
Sophomore year in college.
Can you read and write in the English language?
Yes.
Have you had the opportunity to review the document that charges you in this case?
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
Have you had the opportunity to review the document that charges you in this case, the indictment?
Oh, yes, yes.
Do you fully understand the nature of the charges pending against you?
Yes.
By pleading guilty today, you are giving up certain rights. The right to a trial by jury, the right to be presumed innocent, the right to confront any witnesses that may testify against you, the right to subpoena any witnesses for your defense, the right to testify yourself and to offer any other evidence in your defense, the right to have an attorney to assist you throughout the trial proceedings, and the right to not incriminate yourself. Do you understand these rights?
Yes.
Do you understand that if you were to plead not guilty or remain silent and enter no plea at all, the state would be required to have a trial on these charges by jury?
Yes.
It is my understanding you are entering a negotiated plea. Upon the entering of this plea, the state would be null processing count 1, murder, and count 2, felony murder. You've already entered a plea as to count 3, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, and count 6, aggravated battery. The remainder of the indictment counts 4, aggravated assault. Count 5, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. Count 3, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. Count 7, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. Count 8, aggravated battery. Count 9, hindering a person from making an emergency telephone call. And count 10, possession of a knife during the commission of a felony is what you would be entering a plea to today. Is that your understanding?
Yes.
The maximum sentence for all the charges you will be entering a plea to include the ones you've already pled to, would be 86 years. Is that your understanding?
Can you repeat that?
The maximum possible sentence you could receive for all the charges that you are entering a plea to include counts 4 and 6, which you've already pled to, is a total of 86 years. Is that your understanding?
Yes.
Are you now serving any other sentence in confinement, or are you on probation or parole for anything, anywhere?
No.
Do you understand that you are entering a non-negotiated plea and the court may sentence you to any sentence that is authorized by law?
Yes.
Do you further understand that you may not withdraw your plea once the court pronounces sentence?
Yes.
Should the court sentence include a period of probation, you will be required to obey both general conditions of probation and special conditions of probation. You will be required to follow the general conditions of probation that probation will give to you when you meet with them, including, but not limited to, that you are not to violate the criminal laws of any governmental unit. The special conditions have not yet been determined, but if you are given special conditions, you would have to abide by those as well. Do you understand that a violation of any of these conditions could lead to a revocation of your probation?
Yes.
Are you entering your plea of guilty with an understanding of everything we just talked about?
Yes.
Has anyone used any force, threats, or promises which caused you to plead guilty against your will?
No.
Are you satisfied? I'm sorry. Do you have any more questions before we go on?
No.
Let me pause you there, Ms. Willingham, and let's make it clear what your belief is on which counts merge so that I can be
Yes, Judge.
very clear on what the maximum is. So count 3 alleges a aggravated assault upon Mr. Andrew Chuong.
Yes,
And
Judge.
so that stands alone if 1 and 2 are then dismissed. Count 4 is the striking of the baseball bat to Eric Chuong, ag assault. I believe that looks like it would merge into count 6.
Yes, Judge.
Right? Okay. And then count 5 is the ag assault cutting Eric Chuong. And
That count stands alone.
that count is its own independent allegation. Count 6 is the battery Eric Chuong baseball bat. Count 7 is the one that would merge into count 8.
Correct.
All right. And then hindering 911 is just the 12 months is the misdemeanor.
Correct.
And that's how we reach. So 20 years is on 3, 5, 6, and 8. Is that right?
Yes.
And then the remaining 6 is from 12 months on count 9 to 5 years on count 10.
Yes.
All right. Do we also have the indictment that we had joined issue on earlier today? I think the court reporter might have a copy.
These two are dismissed. You already pled guilty. You're not.
If you could present this, Ms. Willingham, to Mr. Chuong for his
Yes.
signature and indicate which counts
Yes, you
we'd be
can.
going forward on.
Yes.
Just do it in the second column for an additional signature.
That one 20 years. This one you can't. This one 20 years. This one clean. Oh. No. No, that is not. Everything except count 1 and 2. You're pleading guilty to everything except count 1 and 2. We're just talking about what you can be sentenced to. And when it comes to sentencing, those counts that merge, you cannot be sentenced to both of them. You can only be sentenced to, you can't be sentenced to assaults. The ag assault on Eric for hitting him with the baseball bat merges with the ag battery, so you can't be sentenced to this one. You have to be sentenced to this one. You're pleading guilty to everything, but you could only be sentenced to this one, not this one. Okay, and then with this ag assault, that's on Eric. There's no ag battery, so that's the only that stands separately. And then this ag assault is on Jenny Phang. Be sentenced to this one. It merges with this one. So 20 years for this one, 20 years for this one, 20 years for this one, 20 years for this one. So that altogether is 80. And then 6 years for these two. Well, 6 years for this one. 6 years for this one. There's no max on this one. That's how you're getting 86 years. Okay?
That's how she's getting the maximum of 86.
That's the max, 86 years.
It's not scary.
All right?
Yeah. Mr. Chuong, I presented you with the indictment that you had signed earlier in this trial, joining the issue, and when you pleaded guilty to 2 of the counts. And so if you can take a look at that, we would also require your signature to indicate that you're now pleading to the remainder of the counts. Do you see that indictment in front of you?
Yes.
All right. And so could you sign that at this time if we're moving forward?
You're signing here.
All right. Ms. Willingham, you can pick up where you left off.
Yes, Chief.
Understanding all of your rights, have you understood everything I've asked you so far?
Yes.
Understanding all of your rights, do you wish to enter a plea to these charges today?
Yes.
Is your decision to plead guilty made freely and voluntarily?
Yes.
Did you in fact commit the offenses to which you are pleading guilty?
Yes.
Are you a United States citizen?
Yes.
And Judge, before I get into my next question, it is my understanding that the defendant has waived his right to appeal as to the previous counts that he entered a plea to already. The state would also be asking that that apply to the remainder of this indictment.
That's right.
So
So,
I just wanted to clarify that.
Mr. Chuong, do you understand that once we finish tendering your guilty plea and I accept it, that you would be waiving your right to withdraw that plea simply because we have not sentenced you yet? After sentencing, you would still retain limited appellate rights, which Ms. Willingham will explain to you in terms of the timing of how to withdraw a guilty plea. But there's also an avenue where someone can withdraw a plea before sentencing. And what I'm asking you is if you're going to waive that right so that I can send the jury home.
Case, he can excuse this jury. If you don't waive that right, then he's gonna have to hold this jury because you might withdraw, you might try to withdraw this plea within this term of court, and then we'd have to continue with the trial.
Yes.
All right. And Ms. Willingham, you can continue.
Yes, Judge. If you wish to challenge this plea for legal error, you have one of two ways to do it. Your lawyer can explain what these ways are and how they work, but I must advise you of some time limits. The first way is a direct appeal. You have 30 days from the date the sentence is entered to file this appeal. The second way is a habeas corpus petition. You will have 4 years from the date the sentence is entered for the felony offenses, and you will have 12 months from the date the sentence is entered to file this petition. Do you understand these time limits?
Yes.
Do you understand that you are not allowed to possess firearms during the course of your probation if you are given probation?
Yes.
Do you understand if you are found in possession of a firearm, you could be charged with another felony, which carries up to 10 years in confinement?
Yes.
And, Your Honor, I recognize we have put quite a bit of
All
the
right.
facts on the record.
Let's do this for a factual basis. Would the state be alleging and incorporating all the evidence presented during this week?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. And as well as the averments in the indictment.
Yes, Your Honor.
And Mr. Chuong, are you stipulating for the purposes of this plea that the state has introduced enough facts to support the charges you're pleading guilty to?
Yes.
During the trial.
All right. Anything else, Ms. Willingham?
Nothing further from the state.
All right. And I don't know if this was made explicitly clear as part of the plea colloquy, but generally the state's recommendation in this case, along with maybe other terms and conditions, is the maximum possible sentence of 86 years.
Yes, Judge, and I can get into that if the court would like. I didn't know if you wanted me to reserve that for the sentencing hearing when we have it.
Well, just so that he's aware of what the
Yes.
state's going to be recommending. When
Yes,
you say the
Judge.
particulars, it's just they're all going to run consecutive and you're asking for the max.
Yes, Judge, should this case, the state would be asking for each count 3 through 10 to run consecutively, and we would be asking for the max, with the exception, obviously, of the counts that we've previously discussed merged.
All right. But none of these counts, though, have a mandatory minimum to your knowledge?
No,
So there's no required court has to accept.
Correct.
All right. Okay, Mr. Chuong, I'm going to turn it over to you to ask you a few questions to emphasize some things I need to make sure I know, which is, do you understand the nature of the charges that the state's going forward on today that you'd be entering a plea to?
Yes.
And do you still wish to waive all the rights that the state went through and go forward with this change of plea? Do you understand the court's not bound by the recommendation the state makes, and I'm not bound by the recommendation you make either, because you didn't present me with a joint recommendation. So essentially, I'm going to try and look at the facts and everything that's presented to me and make a determination that I think is the appropriate sentence.
Yes.
And you're pleading guilty today because you agree that there are enough facts that support the charges you're pleading guilty to? And let me just ask, since even though we're in this unusual posture, Mr. Shaw, you've been sitting as shadow counsel alongside Mr. Chuong this entire time. Do you have any concerns over his competency or his understanding, or whether this is a voluntary plea?
I believe he's competent, and I believe this is a voluntary plea, Judge.
All right, and I believe Mr. Chuong has also been asked this following in the same himself. All right. Mr. Chuong, is there anything else that you think you'd like me to know, not on sentencing, but before I accept this plea? Or do you have any other questions for me?
No, Your Honor.
All right. Well, in that case, I do find there's a sufficient factual basis for these charges, and I find your plea to be knowingly, voluntarily, and intelligently entered, and I'll accept your plea. We are going to defer sentencing, and now that the plea has been accepted, we'll also note on the final disposition the state's dismissal of counts 1 and 2.
I'll give the present judgment.
All right. Thank you, Deputy Scott. Please be seated, everyone. Members of the jury, thank you for, as always, your continued patience and for being back ready and on time. Have something of an announcement for you all, which is, as I promised, while you're usually outside of the courtroom, we're trying to keep working in here. And it was brought to my attention that the parties had reached a resolution of this case. And while you were at the lunch break, we entered that resolution. And the case at this point is now over when it comes to your involvement. And so once I excuse you, you can step on back and gather your belongings. And at that point, you're free from your service. And it's especially with the thanks to the court for all the time and the effort that you put into this. And you'd be released from any obligation you have to talk about the case or share whatever you want about it. And I will say that once I let you go, I'm going to dash back there because I usually try to thank each of you as well. And I know that the parties a lot of times want the attorneys, that is, want the opportunity to be able to talk with you and get your thoughts about what you thought of the evidence so that they can help them and so they can learn how to present the evidence. And also they just want to hear your reaction to it. So if you're willing to stick around and share those thoughts, we'd love to hear them. And I'll also be back there to answer any questions you might have as well. So if there's nothing else, and we'll also, if you need it, we're going to be preparing excuse letters for you now, documenting this week that you were here with us the Monday through the Wednesday. I can't get you out of work tomorrow, I'm afraid. But it is with the thanks of the court that you're excused from your service. Thank you so much. Oh, I think there is a question. Ma'am, if you could identify your juror number for us one more time.
You should.
Okay.
Did we find out what happened?
I can come talk to you in the back when we're done and off the record. All right. Thank you so much.
All right, the jury.
All right, we'll be in. Well, let me ask this while we're still on the record. Mr. Chuong, is there any reason why we should not proceed to sentencing at some point this afternoon? Is there anything you're waiting on in terms of additional time or evidence or witnesses that you would want to present for sentencing?
One thing so that I did want to correct one thing, count 10, possession of a knife during the commission. There is a mandatory minimum of 5 years on that, but as your honor knows.
It can be probated, suspended. That's right.
What is this afternoon?
Well, I imagine I would go talk to the jurors and they may have some questions and want to debrief. And that process takes about 20 to 30 minutes. And the attorneys may have some questions as well. I'll let Mr. Shaw go back there if the jury wants to talk to them, and him and Ms. Willingham. And so essentially what I'm asking is, when we get back from that 30 to 40 minutes from now, maybe sooner, if you would be ready at that point to go forward with sentencing. In sentencing, we've already gone over the plea is entered. So sentencing is just going to focus on arguments you have, evidence you have if you want to present some, in aggravation or mitigation. Usually the state's going to be the one trying to say that the evidence is aggravating. If you think there's mitigating evidence suggesting that the sentence should be lower, sentencing is where you would make those arguments and where you would present evidence, if you have some, of why the sentence should be lower. And that's not evidence saying you didn't do it. At this point, that is an established fact based on your plea. The evidence would have to be relevant to showing your frame of mind at the time, why perhaps it wasn't a premeditated or calculated crime, why you shouldn't be punished as harshly as somebody else should be punished. Does that make sense? And so do you feel prepared to be able to make those arguments this afternoon? Okay, this is 20 SC 177192, State versus Austin Chuong. We had began a jury trial on Monday. It lasted 3 days. And then mid-trial, after the close of the state's case in chief, I was informed that the parties had reached a resolution of sorts. And so we entered that plea and we withheld sentencing until today. And it's a non-negotiated plea. We've already outlined the counts that Mr. Chuong has pleaded guilty to, and there are no mandatory minimums. There's a maximum of 86 years. And so at this phase, Mr. Chuong is still representing himself. He had proceeded pro se. And what we do now, Mr. Chuong, is simply, I hear from you about what you think the sentence should be and why it should be. And the state goes first. And they also have the right to rebuttal as well, which means they can go last. All right. And so I'll turn it over to Ms. Willingham for any argument or evidence you'd like to introduce for sentencing.
Yes, Judge. As your honor has mentioned, at this time, the state will be asking for the max. We did acknowledge that at the conclusion of the hearing on Wednesday, which the maximum sentence in this case would be 86 years. We are asking for 20 years as to count 3. And that count stands alone. We are asking for 20 years as to count 4. And that count merges into count, sorry, I want to make sure I get this one correct. Count 4 merges into count 6. And we are asking for 20 years as to that. We are also asking, Your Honor, for 20 years as to count 5, which is a count that stands alone. We are also asking for 20 years as to count 7, which as to count 8, as count 7 merges into count 8. We would be asking for 12 months as to count 9, and as to count 10. We would be asking for a sentence of 5 years, and that would be consecutive to all other counts in the indictment. Your Honor has had an opportunity to hear quite a bit of the evidence in this case. The state still stands by that the defendant, although during trial, it did come out a bit, I know defendant mentioned that he believed that someone else was responsible for this. Your Honor, there were 4 people in that home. The defendant is the only person that walked out with just small, minor cuts that were on his finger, which, as the court heard, Detective Bachniak testified that those cuts are consistent with someone who is stabbing or using that knife, and the knife begins to slip through their hand after it is soaked with blood. So, Your Honor, we stand by that the defendant is the person who beat his brother with a bat, which he already admitted to that charge. He entered a plea to that charge before we began trial. He subsequently went and left that room with his father, who he then stabbed.
Let's make this clear for the record. We did not get to hear the testimony of the brother or the mother, but at this phase, I think the state would be able to proffer, I believe it's theory of the case. And so I'd like to hear from you what you believe the exact sequence of events was that evening and why you believe that.
Yes, Judge. What we believe is that at around 4:50 a.m., the defendant entered into his brother's room, which, judging that part, would not necessarily be a belief, as the defendant has stated himself that he went and he did go into his brother's room that night. What we believe is that the defendant then began beating his brother Eric with a bat while Eric was sleeping. Eric then woke up out of his sleep as the defendant continued to beat him with a bat, only stopping because his father and mother, Andrew and Jenny, came into the room and they were able to get the defendant off of Eric. Once they were able to get the defendant off of Eric, they separated them. Eric went into the restroom to get himself cleaned up, and Jenny left the home and went outside to the car to try and get the car ready to go so that she could take Eric to the hospital. That is also corroborated, Your Honor, by the body cam that we saw. When officers arrived, that vehicle was outside with that car door open. And as Officer Delapiana testified, that vehicle was running when they got to the home, which corroborates exactly what both Eric and Jenny told law enforcement, which is that Jenny left the home so that she could take Eric to the hospital. She realized that Eric was taking a long time, so she went back into the home. It is our belief that during that time, Eric was still in the bathroom, getting himself together. He did acknowledge when speaking with law enforcement, Eric stated that he was kind of out of it because he had been hit with the bat so many times. So he did not hear anything that was going on in the kitchen. But what Jenny came into was the defendant being on top of Andrew Chuong, the defendant's father, stabbing him. Jenny then proceeded to try and pull the defendant off of his father, at which time the defendant then stabbed her. She then yelled for Eric to come out to help. At that time, Eric came out of the restroom. He began to try and get the defendant off of both Andrew and Jenny, at which time the defendant then also sliced him. I will not say stab, because that wound was not nearly as severe, but it was a cut still with that knife. And Your Honor, at that time, Jenny was then able to make it to the bathroom after Eric was able to hide the knife in the bathroom. And Jenny then ran into the bathroom, and Eric was trying to kind of get himself still cleaned up. When Jenny went into the bathroom, she was able to call 911, at which time we heard the 911 call. Eric also chimed into that call, acknowledging that the person who committed this crime was the defendant, Austin Chuong. Austin then, Your Honor, left the home. He ran out back. It is our belief that he stood out behind the house where they had an ashtray, and it is our belief that he stood there and smoked a cigarette. And while he smoked that cigarette, his blood was dripping right there on the ashtray. He subsequently ran into the wood line just behind the fence of the home, where he was later found by law enforcement laying in a fetal position, sleeping. However, Your Honor, it is our belief that the reason he ran into that wood line is because When law enforcement arrived, we believe that Austin was still close enough to the home that he knew law enforcement was out in the front. And his only escape would have been running back into that wood line. And that's where he stopped and was ultimately located by law enforcement. So that is, Your Honor, that is what the state would submit to the court are the facts of this case. I do recognize that the court did not have an opportunity during the trial to hear from Eric and Jenny. Your Honor, however, I would acknowledge that based on the family dynamic, this is still Jenny's son. It is still Eric's brother. And as the court did have an opportunity to hear back when we did the Jackson Deno hearing and the subsequent bond motion, I think the bond motion was it was the same day as that hearing. Jenny did mention at that time that this was her son and this was a hard situation for her. She wanted her son to be home. It is not lost on me, Your Honor, that Austin still remains her son regardless of what happened in this case. However, despite how Jenny or Eric may have not wanted to participate in this case, we would still submit that Austin's father, Andrew, is still deceased. Eric was still beaten in the back. He subsequently lost 3 teeth from this incident, and Jenny was still stabbed in her chest. So this is a very heinous set of facts, and for that reason, we would be asking for the maximum sentence. And Your Honor, as mentioned, Austin is only charged. The only charges left on this indictment in reference to Andrew is Andrew's stab wounds. And although, no, we are not here for the sentencing of a murder or the felony murder or even a voluntary. However, that stab wound is ultimately what it leads to the crime. So for those reasons, we would be asking for the maximum sentence. We do acknowledge that the defendant has a very minor criminal history. I believe it's only a possession of marijuana that was a pending misdemeanor case.
Right. So it's just because it's pending, so there's really no criminal history that I can actually consider.
There is no criminal history in this case. But based on the seriousness of the charges, based on the events that played out in the home on April 6th of 2020, the state would ask for the maximum sentence.
And do you have any witnesses to present? And even if obviously they're not here, but at any point while the 3 years this case has been pending, had you heard from Jenny Phang or Eric, the brother, about what they wanted to have happen in this case?
I've never had the opportunity to speak with Jenny. I have spoken with Eric, and Eric's exact words to me were that he did not want to go against his mother. He did not care what happened to his brother, but he did not want to go against his mother. And for that reason, they never really gave us an answer as to how they wished for this case to proceed. I have had the opportunity to speak with Mr. Jim Chuong, who is Andrew Chuong's brother. And the initial offer from the defense was a 10-year offer, and Mr. Chuong was okay with that. I explained to him at that time that based on the set of facts, that we did not believe that that was a fair resolution, and he left it to the state to be able to proceed forward how we needed to. So, Your Honor, at this time, I don't have a definitive answer for the court as to what the family is asking for, because they have not represented that to us. They have not been active in participating. But again, it is not lost on me, the family dynamics in this case. I did speak with Mr. Chuong before we started today, and he did not, he was fine not speaking. He didn't necessarily have anything that he wanted to say. I asked him specifically if he did want to speak, and he said he was just here to do whatever was needed.
All right. Is that right, Mr. Chuong? Okay. I see that he's nodding his head. So, Ms. Willingham, is there any other argument or evidence the state would like to present? All right, Mr. Chuong, this is your opportunity to say anything and everything you'd like me to consider. And if you could pull the microphone close to you.
I heard something you said about my character. Okay. Hello, Judge McAfee. I'm speaking in regard to why you should consider and accept my plea for first offender, a low sentence, or a low split probation sentence because I didn't kill my father. I'm a good person. I'm not a violent, nor am I a very confrontational person. I don't get into trouble. In fact, it's the complete opposite. I always try to be a good person, as my father's always taught me. I've always tried to learn from him how he's lived his life and how I can be more like him. He sacrifices a lot for his family and everyone in it, which is what I tried to do my whole life ever since I was old enough to understand things. I believe family should always have your back no matter what the situation, blood or not blood, because family can mean friends too. I've gotten to know so many different people in my experience in jail, and while it took me a little while to understand it, I believe this experience changed me for the better. I was a spoiled kid when I was 16, 17, 18. My father always gave me whatever I wanted. I was babied, but, I mean, that's why I love him so much. I didn't want to grow up, I'm in it. I let Eric do the chores around the house because, I was lazy, but now that I've sat in jail, I've learned how good I really had it. And that it was a privilege, I know. I know what I did to Eric, and I feel terrible for it but I didn't kill my dad, and nor did I hurt my mom. I apologize to him, to God, and to my family for what I did. It was not in my character. I was just mad at how he treated my father and mother, and I let my anger control me. I love my father, I love my brother, and I love Eric. And I built that tree house that you guys saw in the backyard with him. I mean, it took weeks. No, that's when I learned how to use tools for the first time. We waited in those huge Black Friday lines to buy that trampoline in our backyard. I remember we hid it behind, a stack of toilet paper the previous day on Black Friday. I used to help him and my mom farm in the back. That's how I learned to really grow things and nurture things. My parents bought dogs for me because I like to take care of things. Dogs are like babies, they only know as much as you teach them. All my dogs loved me, and I remember when I buried my first dog, I used to talk to him at his grave every single day. He used to follow me around, but, not getting carried away. It's just, I mean, I did everything with my father. I drove him to work, helped him. We sat at the campfire every night just talking about things. I don't know what happened, that day. I don't know why I did that to Eric. I'm usually so grounded, and I always think things through first, but I do know it will never happen again. I was just young, and really stupid. But I've grown up now. I'm not the same kid I was. I'm 23. I've changed. While I always told myself I wouldn't let jail change me, I think I changed me for the better. I'm no longer lazy like I was. I don't take things for granted anymore. I want to get out so I can make something of my life now. I don't want my 20s and 30s thrown away. I sat in jail trying to learn everything I can for when I get out. So I can't say I wasted my time in here. I learned little bits of Spanish from the, Latinos in here. I learned how to really design and sew clothes in here. I started with a bread tie that I twisted around to create a needle. Now I can sew bucket hats, jackets, pockets, sweatpants, all type of things right now. I even tried learning Mandarin on the tablets because I already know Cantonese. It's just, I'm not too great at Mandarin. But I gave up because it was hard learning because my mom on the phone was my only teacher. And, it kind of costs money to pay on the phone. And, but, it's hard to describe my character because I truly believe character is really shown in your actions, not your words. My actions show my character, and you don't know who I truly am. You just know what mistakes I've made, and that does not reflect who I truly am. That isn't who I am. No. So maybe I'll just go on and tell you what I want to do in life so you can understand why I want this first offender and low sentence and hopefully a probation sentence, because I just want to help people in life. It gives me true joy when I help people. It's why I want to become a nurse. It makes me feel good inside. I want to save lives. That's why I was studying nursing at Kennesaw. It has one of the best programs in Georgia. That's why I chose that school. I was in my second year getting good grades, on track with my program with my cousin, who is 1 year younger than me. We're trying to be nurses together. And I just want to continue that when I get out. I wanted to turn that degree into a career. My plan was to join the Army and become a flight medic or a pararescue jumper. You know, the people who rappel down and save you is a huge dream of mine. And I wanted to be on the helicopters and be the reason why he made it to the hospital, or be the reason why she's still breathing. I was gonna come out of the army and get a job at the hospital on the helicopters at the helipads. And then I was gonna help my parents in their real estate business on the side if they needed help. But I feel like my life was meant to be something great. I've had too many heroes and life experiences for me not to just be nothing. You know, I don't feel like I'm a waste of a life, and I don't want to waste my life away in a facility. I don't think it's right. You know, my father died protecting me that day, and remembering his life has taught me how much you can do for a person. He worked from 9 a.m. to 10 p.m. every day, but Sundays, and in hot attics and in the cold outside, sweating, shivering, and never complained. I know this because I was there helping him. I was here behind him, holding the flashlight. I even bought him a headlamp once, and he joked about it, saying he didn't want it because he wanted me there. That's why he didn't want to use it. He just wanted his son there. I would carry his tools back and forth from the car, you know, to the units. I know every weird name the tools he had because he didn't know the English ones. Like he used to call this hammer a thup thup because that's the sound it made. I don't know. He was just the perfect dad, and I hope I can make my son feel the same way about me that I did about him. I just want to be something in life for him and my mom. I want to make them proud. I want to finish school. I want them to be able to brag about me with their friends. I want my dad in heaven to smile when he sees what I'm doing. I don't want to waste my life away like some people I see in jail. I don't use drugs, nor do I drink. And if you do grant me a low sentence, will now allow me to make them proud, I promise to you that you'll see what I can become. And I hope in a few years, I can write to you a letter and tell you everything that's going on in my life. And you'll smile because I'll remember this moment. It's going to be one that I'm going to look back on for the rest of my life because there's still good in the world. Hope isn't, you know, for nothing. Oh, shit. No, I promised myself and my father and my mom that I'll be the best person I can be. I've written letters to my future self in 5 years, 10 years, telling myself to keep to this. I just read one of them last month that I wrote to myself 3 years ago to never forget my dad and what I promised him. I told myself I'll try to be just like him. I'm a big family person. If you just ask any of my family members, they'll tell you the same. You know, Jim back there, Gene, you know, my cousin, my mom, my brother, Nikki, Ryan. I'm a quiet, you know, loving, caring, and all around good person. You know, I remember they told the police all this in their interviews. They said it was such a surprise that this happened. And it is. It's not in my character. I like to smile a lot, you know. I mean, I do worry a lot, but I think it's just how I cope with things. That's why I smile. But I overthink a lot of things, and I even have, you know, sometimes I get anxiety attacks because I worry too much. But my girlfriend used to tell me about this. I'm getting kind of off track, but I'm kind of writing. I wrote this kind of like a mind dump. You know, I've noticed that it's just really everything that I'm feeling. You know, when I think about the future. But I feel like this is the best way you can see into my mind, and the best way I can convey to you who I am. Because I can't show you my actions right now. You know, I would like first offender so I can pursue my dreams, Your Honor. I've already planned out the military aspect of it. I know a recruiter who will waive your felony so you can join the service. He's supposed to be all over recruiting over all the surrounding 3 states, you know, Georgia, Alabama, and Tennessee. He's a friend of one of my close personal friends. His name's Rick. You know, my dream is to become an EMT on a helicopter, but if I couldn't have that, I would just continue to be a flight medic in the Army. But, you know, I want to be able to help my mother at home. She's alone right now, every day in an empty house, spending all of her days alone, holidays. I call her every week, and it breaks my heart knowing that no one's around her. Dog. I mean, just a few months ago, my own dog died, and she cried telling me about it. And I mean, I know she saw that dog as an extension of me because she was always at my ankles whenever I went anywhere in the house. You know, it makes me like really cry at night when I sit thinking about her in that house. She doesn't deserve that. She doesn't deserve. I mean, she deserves to have people around her, family around her that loved her or that love her. You know, Eric already moved out, so all that's left that wants to do it. You know, I wanted to take her traveling and have her live with me if I ever went overseas in the military. She'd always talk about traveling when I was little, but my dad would never let her. Um, you know, she wanted to go to London, Thailand, Europe, Japan. She would always smile when she used to talk about it. I mean, oh shit. I mean, we actually did travel once when I was 18. We went to Malaysia, to Singapore, and then to Kuala Lumpur. I went to go see all the Buddhist temples in Thailand and shopped at Bangkok and all the different markets. You know, Chatu Chat was one of them. That was the most memorable. My dad sent me and her there to show me how different the world is to the United States and how much of a privilege it is to live here. And I've never seen her happier in my life. You know, my mom. You know, my mom's life was, to my memory, spent taking care of me and caring for me. And I just want to be able to repay her now that I'm older, to take care of her for a change. She's a great woman. You know, she spent over $100,000 in legal fees trying to get me out. And we talk every week about what we both have going on during the days and what I'll do for her when I get out. And that's a big part of the reason I want a low sentence or even a split probation sentence, because I just want to be with her. I want to go see my dad at his grave. I I haven't I haven't even been there yet since he died. I missed the funeral, and I'm the only person in the family who hasn't talked to him yet. And I don't feel that's right. You know, talking to him whenever I'm alone, it's not really the same as talking to him at his grave. You know, I promise you I'm not a bad kid. I've never been in trouble my entire life, excepting that weed charge that Miss Willingham spoke about. You know, I used to smoke in high school, but I stopped in college so it wouldn't really distract me from my grades. No, this is just a mistake, Your Honor. Huge, stupid mistake, and it doesn't reflect who I am. And I beg you to please give me a second chance. And I'll show you I deserve it. I'll mail you every week, giving you updates on my life, if that's what it has to take. But I just know that I'm gonna be a good force in the world. I know it in my heart. My parents did too much for me not to be. You know, my dad, he used to tell me this story of how he came to the United States. He used to tell me he was smuggled here out of Vietnam so he wouldn't be, a child soldier. You know, he came here when he was 14 and somehow made it. He named me after, he said, the first city he went to when he began his life. And after he brought his family over to California from Vietnam, all of his siblings and parents all cramped in the one house that we used to go visit every other year around Chinese New Year. You know, some of them still live there now. No, he named me Austin because he went to Austin because he told me he wanted to go see cowboys because he thought cowboys at the time were, some cool thing because that's what the United States was known for. But he left Austin because he didn't get to see no cowboys for real. But that's why he came to Gainesville, to Georgia, and met my mom, who was also an immigrant trying to start a life in here because she was sending money back home, back to Malaysia to her parents. My mom also told me this when I was young. No, I'm their son, and I just feel like I need to make them proud. And I wasn't even doing all that, or I wasn't even doing a lot of bad things before. I was going to school, I was on track, getting good grades, even though it was a little bit bumpy at the time because I had to do Zoom classes because of COVID. You know, I was playing way too many video games back then, and I realize now that I look back, I wasted a lot of my time on that. You know, I think I had over like 10,000 hours on screen time just sitting in front of the computer. And I should have been doing something productive. Like, I like to design and build things, and I think I got that from my dad because he's at home and he just likes to build things at home. Like, I play a lot of Minecraft, building cities, medieval cities because I like fantasy. My dad once told me he wanted me to try to be a city planner because I like playing so many building games. But I just want to do something with my life, Your Honor. I don't want to be in prison. I don't want to sound arrogant, but I don't think a prison is a place where I'll thrive because I should be able to prove to everyone what I can be. I know in my heart what I'm gonna do when I get out, and I'm not gonna waste my chance if you give me it. And however long I spend in jail, I'll be working towards my plans when I'm free. I've already planned out some of my ideas. I wanted to start maybe a clothing company, uh, named Chong Threads. The name's kind of a work in progress right now, but my plan was kind of be a side hobby. I was gonna go to Goodwill and buy graphic sweaters and repurpose them into sweatpants and try to sell them. I ran it by a couple people and they said it's a good idea. It'd be on the urban wear side of fashion, but I started to write a medieval book called, Fall of Paragon in here. It's also a work in progress title. I ran out of books to read and I decided to create one. That's how I started writing that book. It's been filling in a lot of my free time and also improving my, writing speed. It helped me write this too. Like, it just helps me get into another world and just get out of my own head, if that makes sense. Right now, the book's like 130 pages right now. I stopped writing because of everything that's going on recently, and I had to focus on other things. But I'm gonna finish it later. I tell my mom about it all the time. But I lost the original copy due to an accident. An officer threw it away. The original was around 500 pages, but I'm rewriting it a little bit better. But I call my mom every week and tell her about it, and we want to get it published so she can tell her friends that my son wrote a book. She has nothing to brag to them about, and we're just waiting for the day I get out so we can be together again. She told me that she wants to go down to Florida with me when I get released. And I just really miss my family, Your Honor. As I said before, I'm a really big family person because before this, I never spent more than 2 days away from my mom or dad. Barring vacations, we would always call each other and bring back things from, one another when we came back. My dad always used to bring me home jade necklaces, jade Buddha necklaces for me. I was wearing one at the time when I got arrested, the one that he gave me. That was one of my favorite ones. But, it's just my family and I are close. Jean, my cousin, I spend every weekend with her, and I spend time with her when she gets off work. I used to be able to mail a guardian for them when they would go out with their friends when we were younger. Girls in our family aren't allowed to go out by themselves when we were young, so I would always accompany them to festivals and to fairs. They would always tell me to pretend to be the guy from another school so it wouldn't be embarrassing to them. Because who wants to have your cousin hanging out with you all the time, right? I even had to go to the prom with them one time. That was the suit you saw me wearing was the prom suit I wore to their prom. And I just really miss them all, and I just want to get back to them. I don't like being surrounded by strangers and people who don't love me. I just feel alone all the time in here. And I really miss everyone. Everyone wants me out. I call my family regularly and they tell me all this. We always reminisce. My cousins tell me about the boys they have crushes on and everything. And I just beg of you to please accept my plea of a low sentence because I don't get into trouble. I'm not that type of person. I don't believe in owning guns. I rarely have run-ins with the police. My last memory was just like not turning on my headlights or something like that and speeding at like 4 a.m. when I was driving home from my girlfriend's house. I have strong and good morals. I believe that, everyone has a heart and everyone wants to be a good person and everyone has good in them, and it's just their life experience that makes them do different. I've only had good people in my life. My mom and my dad, my uncles, my cousins, my friends. I know I made a mistake, and that's why I'm wanting a low sentence because, or I know I made a mistake. That's why I want a low sentence because if what if that's what you feel is best, I understand. But please know, please believe I'm a good person. I would never do anything evil in my life. I believe in karma for real. I don't want to be around, these people anymore. They all look at me like a target because, my hand is broken and I'm not in no gang, and I refuse to join a gang because I don't believe, that just puts you into more violence. They look at me like I'm little, and that's why they always look at me like a target. And I'm asking you to sentence me to, 25 years, 30 years probation and serve 5 to 10 years in jail. All the charges ran concurrent with first offenders, so my record's clean, so I can do what I want to do in my life to help people. I want to be in the medical field. I wish you could just see into my heart and see what I feel, because I'm not an evil person. I'm not malicious. I'm a good person. I just wish there was a way you could see that, or that I could prove to you, but I can only say it. And I don't feel like that's enough. I don't feel like I'm expressing myself as best as I can. But that's why I'm saying so much. And I'm sorry if it's lengthy, but I just don't know how else to show you who I am. And I only have words right now to show it. I can only show you once you grant me a second chance. And I'll do good, Mr. McAfee. I promise you that I will. I don't believe I'm a person who should spend years in a prison. I don't even know how to survive around these people in this environment. I'm not violent, nor I do know how to really defend myself properly. I've been stabbed 3 times in the shoulder when people tried to extort me in here and rob me. I had to be moved over 4 times because of all these situations. People really tried to. There was a situation where someone tried to rape me once, and I had to tell the police, and I was afraid that I got labeled a snitch, and then I'd have a bad rap in the jail and everything like that. That's why I got moved to Alpharetta. But I've been jumped in here by a bunch of gang members, and I've seen someone get stabbed over 30 times and thrown in the shower once. And it took me, the police 10 minutes to get there, and nothing happened to the people who stabbed them. I really fear for my life in here. I fear for my safety. I could really die in here, I believe. Like, people target me because I refuse to join gangs, and because of my hand, and because I'm little, and I just don't want to be in here. I can't keep faking that I'm tough because I'm really not. How my mom taught me to deal with problems is just to walk away. But this isn't a situation or an environment where you can just walk away. That's even more of a reason for people to target you because they think you're scared. I'm not like these people. I don't steal, I don't rob, I don't kill people, I don't fight people. I get told by so many people in here that this isn't the place for me. Inmates and even the guards say this to me, that I shouldn't be in here. My family has spent too much money trying to get me out of jail. No one wants me in here, Judge. I know I made a mistake, but I'm a good person and I deserve a second chance. I just beg of you to please consider my plea for a low split probation sentence. I believe that I'll be a good force on the world if you just give me the chance. I know it in my heart I'll be. In my dad's memory, I have to be. I'm his son. And if I'm not even a shred like him, I'm a disgrace of a son. If I'm not like him, I didn't learn from what he did. So please just grant me this sentence, grant me probation, grant me a low sentence. I don't want to spend my life in prison. I'm not a bad person, I promise you. Just, thank you for taking the time to listen to me.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chuong, for sharing that. Ms. Willingham, do you have anything else to add? All right. A few thoughts, Mr. Chuong, and we've been able to spend some time together this past week. And, the first thing I would say is that this is also something that I'm not going to forget. And this is something that I take very seriously, and it's the hardest thing that I have to do. And it's not something I'm going to just flippantly throw out a number, and call it a day and move on. And so this has been something I've had to think about quite a bit. I'll start off saying that I don't think the state's recommendation is the appropriate one, where we throw everything at you and bury you under the jail for a couple of reasons. I mean, throughout this process, especially since you decided to represent yourself, I've been able to engage with you quite a bit. I mean, I think it's very clear, and everyone here would agree that you're intelligent, that you're educated, you've been respectful this entire time, and again, I think why this case has been so out of the ordinary is because it just seems it doesn't fit into the mold and the box that we seek so often. You don't have any criminal history. I'm not hearing from, the family members most affected by this, by your mother and brother. They're not clamoring for justice. And again, for me to throw everything the law could put at you. I think that makes a difference. I think even though and we'll talk about this in a second, even though I'm not hearing a full admission from you, the fact that you decided and the state allowed for you to enter a guilty plea, it weighs into this. The state decided and recognized the most serious charges and by their pretrial offer acknowledged that there's some ambiguity in this case, that again, it doesn't really fit within clear lines. So, I do agree with you that you should have the opportunity to start over one day, and that you shouldn't spend the rest of your life in prison. But I think where we disagree is that I don't think that can happen until you've really paid the full debt for what you've done. And I want to give you the chance to prove that to the parole board, that you're ready for that. But on the other side of the ledger, the crimes that you admitted to doing, which is what a guilty plea is, even though you still can't bring yourself to say it today, are absolutely brutal. And when it comes to a stabbing, especially, it's a thing that requires determination and commitment. And to me, the evidence didn't leave me with much doubt of who was responsible for everything in that house that evening. And although I didn't get the full story, I still I get this sense throughout the process that there's just a lack of full awareness on your part of the situation you're in. And I think part of you still thinks that you could walk right out of here having, gotten a time served sentence. And that, again, I think that shows a full awareness of what has happened. The purpose ultimately is, again, a sentence has to recognize the severity of what's happened. And when I'm keeping in mind the whole purpose of this is punishment is part of it, rehabilitation is part of it, and deterrence is part of it. And a low sentence, I don't think is going to further any of those three goals. And I don't feel as if you've really fully come to terms about what happened that night. And that doesn't mean you're evil. That doesn't mean that this is what has to define you for the rest of your life. But there does have to be some accountability. And, a low sentence doesn't answer that. But I do hope that you are able to achieve these things that you want. And I still think you can be able to once you're out. And you'll get out one day. And that could be sooner than later, again, if you're able to convince the parole board. And I don't think that this is going to be the end of the road for you. And I still think that you have promise. So with that, after considering kind of the totality of the circumstances, the purposes and all the aspects and aggravation and mitigation and what we're doing here as a sentence, on the counts you've pled guilty to, which would be 3 through 10, I'll sentence you as follows. On count 3, aggravated assault, the sentence would be 20 years to serve. Count 4 would be 20 years, it would merge. Count 5 would be 20 years to serve concurrent to count 3. Count 6 would be 20 years to serve concurrent to count 3. Count 7 merges. Count 8, the aggravated battery, would be 20 years probation consecutive to count 10. Count 9 is 12 months to serve, concurrent to count 3. And count 10 would be 5 years to serve, consecutive to count 3. And so the total sentence would be 40 years to serve 25 years with the balance on probation. The special conditions would be that you're not to possess any weapons, that you're to have no violent contact with the listed victims in this case, and that you're not to consume any drugs or alcohol. As this will include and contemplates a term of felony probation for any technical violations. Once you're released and on felony probation, it'll fall under the sentencing options system with a sanctions cap of PDC or RSAT. Ms. Willingham, is there anything else you believe needs to be reflected on the record or as part of this sentence?
Judge, just, one thing I wanted to clarify, it might have been, I heard wrong. Did you say that count 3 merging?
I said count 4 and count 7 merge.
I just wanted to make sure that was correct.
All right. And do we want to clarify, we believe count 4 merges into count 3 and count 7 merges into count 6?
Count 4 merges into count 6.
Okay,
Count 7 merges into count 8.
to count 8. All right. 1 and 2 were dismissed by motion of the state, so those are null pros. Anything else, Ms. Willingham? All right, Mr. Chuong, I wish you the best of luck. All right, we're off the record.